Introduce Mark Baird.
Is this working? Everybody hear me? Yeah. I'd like to thank you all for inviting us here to speak. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And my wife and I used to have a ranch down by Lincoln a long time ago, and oddly enough, we moved to Siskiyou County because we were tired of the state monkeying with the water all the time. So we thought, we'll find us a place that the water rights are tied to the deed, and then, we're just not going to have any more problems ever again with our water. Well, I got some bad news. That didn't help us any. In fact, it probably got worse because the state of California doesn't have any compunction whatsoever about stealing private property from individuals that pay for that property. And Thomas Paine said, "I don't have anything but the light of history to guide my feet. I can't see the future. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but experience has to be my guide." You've heard the expression, if you don't know history, you're going to be condemned to repeat it. That's not exactly true. You're going to repeat history. But by knowing history, you can possibly not make the same mistake again and again and again. And I'd like to talk to you just for a second before I start on the state of Jefferson about your inherent liberty. This is the sense that you were born with when God created you. You were born with a sense of what was right and wrong. And you were born with a sense of liberty in your heart. You know when things are getting bad. You know when they're getting worse and worse and worse. And if you look at history, when a people is tyrannized and oppressed to the point where they just don't feel there's any other avenue, then something big happens. It's either a revolution, or people get off their rear ends and vote, or they start campaigning, or they come up with a new idea. And what we're saying is, the ship called California has been on the same course for 50 years. And for 50 years it hadn't worked. Our unemployment is up, our debt is up, everything is up. All the bad things are up and all the good things are down. So our suggestion today is, should we keep doing the same thing for another 50 and hope it turns out different? Or should we do something historic? And I'd like to just talk to you now about that sense of liberty. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We hold them. We weren't asked about them, we weren't given them. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Self-evident means no one taught you this. It's evident to anyone with eyes and ears to see what's wrong and what's right. And those truths are that all men are created equal. And they're endowed by their Creator. Endowed. That means you inherit these rights. They are passed to you. You didn't ask for them, and you have no ability to give them away. They were passed to you. Whether you use them or not, they're yours. And those rights are unalienable rights. They're immutable. They're not changeable. You can't give them away. You can't sell them. No one else can buy them. No one can use them. They're unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And government is instituted among men for one reason and one reason only, and that is to protect the rights we hold most dear, the unalienable rights. That's the only reason for government to exist, to protect our rights. And when government fails in this duty, it is the obligation of the people to alter or to abolish that form of government and institute a form of government that's more favorable to our safety and our happiness and the things that we want and need for our children. Right on. And so, and the last part about inherent liberty is that all of government's just power is derived from the people, all of its just power. Now, as people, we're free to do nothing. And when we do nothing, government takes power that doesn't belong to it. It inserts itself into every aspect of our lives. Regulation increases. Unelected bureaucrats find themselves in a position where they can institute fines and fees. There was a Frenchman, Count Montesquieu, who was sent to the United States after a couple of pretty bad French revolutions because he wanted to know what we did in the United States, because what we were doing worked. We won a country, 3% of the population of the United States took a country from the most powerful military force on earth, and they instituted a form of government that actually worked. And the Count wanted to find out what we did. And here's what he found out. He found out that government works best when you can look your representation in the eye. He said that the county was the township he called it, that was the old-time word for county, was the greatest form of government ever instituted in the world. Because in the county, you can look your representation in the eye. In the county, typically, no one was in charge of regulation that also had the power to place a fee on that regulation. The person that placed the fee wasn't the same person that wrote the regulation. The person that collected the fee was neither one of the first two. Therefore, no one was in a position to sit in judgment of you and your property in the sense that he had the vertical development of the regulation, the fee, the ability to collect the fee, and the ability to jail you if you didn't pay the fee. All of those were different people. And we've lost that form of government through California's laws. So what we're here to do is to ask you a question. We in Siskiyou County and Modoc County and Glenn County and Tehama County shortly, and we've got pretty good things going on in Del Norte County, we're trying to do something. We're trying to accomplish the first Article 4, Section 3 state split in 150 years. Article 4, Section 3 of the United States Constitution says, and I'm paraphrasing because I'm old and I don't have a good memory, but it says, no state shall be formed from the territory contained within a state unless the state legislature agrees and Congress agrees. The founding fathers must have foreseen the need for this or they wouldn't have put it in the Constitution, and I submit to you, these guys were geniuses. So this has been done before. It's been done 4 times in our history before. This is a legal process, it's moral, it's ethical, and there's historical precedent for it. And there is a need for it now because California is ungovernable, and you've heard a couple of people say that. What does that mean? It means that in its present form and its present size, the way California conducts its business, it doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? Because you are irrelevant in this process. I'm irrelevant. Our vote is irrelevant. The votes of our representatives are irrelevant. I spoke to our state senator and I told him, I said, you know, if you and every state senator and every assemblyman that represents the northern third of the state of California got the flu and stayed home forever, it wouldn't matter, because nothing you want can be accomplished with a majority in the southern 2/3 of California. 99% of the, or 98% of the representation in California begins at a line between San Francisco and Sacramento and goes south from there. We literally have 3% of the representation in the state of California above that line. So you can see that nothing will work for us because our votes are irrelevant. And one example of that, and this isn't a deal breaker, a lot of journalists like to say, oh, they're just mad about the fire tax, but the fire tax is indicative because that's a tax that was largely passed by urban legislators whose constituents don't pay the tax. I mean, in Pico Rivera, they don't have CAL FIRE. They don't have CAL FIRE in Maywood or Bellflower or Huntington Beach or Hermosa Beach or San Francisco County or San Mateo County. They don't have CAL FIRE, they have fire departments. So these guys passed this legislation over the objections of every single legislator in the northern third of California, and the people who vote for them don't pay the tax. What a wonderful thing when you can create revenue for the general fund, and you know for a fact that there's never going to be any political fallout from the people who put you in your chair. So you don't have to worry about it. And as Terry said, have you ever tried to email the assemblyman from Maywood? You know, you can't do it because he'll just bounce it back to you because you don't belong to him. So California is ungovernable. What can we do about that? We can do an Article 4, Section 3 state split. Now the way we've decided to do that is, and believe me, mistakes have been made. We've never broken a state in half before, so you know we're kind of learning about the process as we go along. But what we decided to do was we decided to form a declaration and petition to withdraw from the state of California. The reason we decided to go that way was because when we present these declarations to your county's government, it causes no action on their part. It does not cost your county any money. They do not have to direct a county agency to do anything. This doesn't cost the taxpayer one single nickel. And what it is it is simply an affirmation of what you want to see happen, which is to form a government that represents you. And you're telling and by the way, you're not asking their permission to vote for this. You're going to instruct them as to the will of the people, and your recourse is to elect a new individual if they don't follow your will. So with this declaration, and what we want to do is gather enough of these declarations from enough counties to form what we think would be a viable state, and there's no magic number. And by the way, if the people of Sutter County and the people of Yuba County choose not to do this, we simply say, God bless you and thank you very much for your time and good luck with California. But if you do choose to become involved in this and form a committee of your own, we will be there for you. We'll help you. We'll show you what worked and what didn't work. We'll supply paperwork. We have declarations that were written professionally. They're legal documents that contain the legal description of your county. And they're designed to do a couple of different things. Number one, they're designed to show the state of California that we want something, and that's very important. We want representation. And they're also designed to tell the state legislature that if we don't get that something else is going to happen. And I'll tell you about that in just one second. So we take the declaration and the petitions, and once we get a pile of those, enough to form a viable state, 10 counties, 12 counties, 14, whatever it happens to be, then we go to the state legislature and we will have those recorded into the state legislative record, and we can then cause the state legislative council to author legislation to separate the X number of counties from the state of California. At that point, we find a Democrat and a Republican assembly person, a Democrat and a Republican state senator, and we have these bills introduced into the legislature, and then the real action begins. The problem with this meeting is twofold. Number one, we want to know whether you want to participate, and we'll get to that towards the end. But number two, if you choose to participate, this has to be the last meeting you go to prior to the formation of our new state, where you go home and do nothing. We have to ask you to do something. We need 10 times 10,000 patriots to stand up and make this work. It is only the overriding, overwhelming will of the people that's going to cause this to happen and cause the state of Jefferson to be born. Our lack of representation is the reason we're doing this. And as Terry pointed out, I actually did the arithmetic one day. I was a sport, I guess. And it's 975,000 people for one state senator. 975,000 people. If each of his constituents called him once a year, 261 days a year, not including holidays and so on, he'd have to answer the phone right at about 4,000 times a day, and he'd be able to spend 8 seconds with each caller. I don't call that representation. These guys represent 1 million people over 30,000 square miles. That's not representation. In New Hampshire, by comparison, each state representative represents 3,000 people. You know how much a political campaign costs in New Hampshire? About $1,000. The guy files his filing fee, puts gas in his car, and he goes and knocks on every door in his district. And when he does something wrong, people are yelling at him in Walmart the next day. As opposed to here, a political campaign in the state of California costs millions and millions of dollars. Who's paying for those campaigns? It is a magic group called the stakeholders. Y'all ever heard of the stakeholders? Oh, yeah. Those are the people that aren't you. Your voters, taxpayers, property owners, farmers, ranchers, the people that make this economy go. When the stakeholders are invited to a meeting, you're not there. And I've been to a lot of them. I'm a president of a water rights group in Siskiyou County, and I don't know why, but I keep getting invited to these water bond focus groups. I asked the senator that invites me, I said, why do you invite me? I'm the only one in the room that's against this thing. Because you want to build 2 dams in Southern California, but you want to use $500 million to rip out 4 dams in my backyard. Yeah. That's going to break my county. Yeah. So those are, but the stakeholders are represented. The large irrigation districts in Southern California. I was at one of these things where the president of the Bay Delta Stewardship Council said, and I heard this, my job is to ensure reliable water deliveries to Southern California water exporters and to save the environment. So that's what Bay Delta is. The head of Placer Irrigation said that Bay Delta could be written up in any newspaper in the country in the obituary section, and it would be titled The Death of Northern California, because those are 2 massive tunnels that will take the Sacramento River down 25% at a minimum. So that's the rest of the water that you need to grow food for the United States of America. And I'm sorry, I just don't find that representative of the needs or wishes of Northern California. So we have that lack of representation. Now, Terry talked about how much representation Los Angeles has. So let's get back to the issue of what happens. We take the declarations and we go to Sacramento, and we're not kids here. There's a pretty good chance we're going to be ignored, right? So when we get there and Sacramento ignores us, now leg 2 is filled, and this is a 3-legged process. I call it the footstool of Sims versus Reynolds. It has 3 legs. Number 1, we have to have standing. That's something that the declaration and petition to withdraw will give the counties of Yuba and Sutter. It will give them standing in a federal challenge against Reynolds versus Sims. Number 2, we have to have asked for something and been denied. What are we asking for? Representation, that's easy. So now in any federal challenge, there has to be one other thing. There has to be a remedy for the harm. What's the harm? We were ignored. We asked for representation and we were ignored. What's the remedy for that? More representation. So if we succeeded in overturning Reynolds versus Sims, we could then set the stage to return California to a federal model of government, which is 1 state senator for each county. Well, there are 40 rural counties. Heck, we could vote ourselves out of California if we challenge that law successfully. Sims versus Reynolds is kind of interesting. It was 1964 when the decision was made. It was made in order to protect the voting rights of Southern blacks. It was a very noble cause, a lofty ideal. I'm glad that those voting rights were protected. But the problem was unintended consequences. So often when the court involves itself in the legislative process, which by the way they have no business doing, unintended consequences always prevail. Well, the unintended consequence of Reynolds versus Sims was this. The dissenting justice predicted that within 10 years, 6 urban centers would control all politics for the United States of America. And it's exactly what happened. New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sacramento. And there are a couple other, Chicago and a few other cities, but those cities literally contain enough votes to control presidential elections and all other elections. In California, for example, 3 cities are capable of passing any law they want, anytime they want, regardless of who wants it or who doesn't want it, it's going to pass. Whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, it doesn't really matter. Who's at fault doesn't matter. That is simple arithmetic. We have become irrelevant because of Reynolds versus Sims. So if we can challenge Reynolds versus Sims successfully and have that set aside, then perhaps we can move towards that federal model. The problem with Warren was that when he wrote Reynolds versus Sims, he ignored the federal constitution, as Terry said, because each state has 2 senators. Vermont has 2 and Alaska has 2. Wyoming, the least populous state in the country, has 2, and California, the most populous state, has 2. Well, Warren also ignored himself, because later on they had Brown versus Thompson in Wyoming, where the court said, in the case of Niobrara County, which only had 3,000 people, every area should have representation, even sparsely populated areas. Well, I read that and I thought, gosh, that just doesn't make any sense to me, because he just got finished saying that rocks and trees shouldn't have votes, only people have votes. Then they went on in Sawyer versus Tulare Water to say that rocks and trees are allowed to have votes provided it's not done prejudicially and provided it's done for the good of the state or the entity which is represented in the case. So they've contradicted themselves twice. They've ignored the federal constitution, and a lot of lawyers think Reynolds versus Sims was just plain bad law, and it's time to attack that. We think we could get that done pro bono because we don't have any money. By the way, we have no finance, we have no business behind us, no corporation, no group. The Koch brothers aren't paying our bills. We paid for our own motels and our own hamburgers, and we put gas in our own cars, and we accept no money from anybody. And any... The only money we collect are in the cans are to pay for this hall and the materials that you're reading, and that's all there is to that. So if we can succeed in overturning Sims versus Reynolds, then we can go back to the federal model of government. Now, why do we want to do that? Why is it we want to do that? Well, how about SB 1? Have you heard of SB1?
Yeah.
SB1 is going to set up regional governance committees that are not elected by you. They're basically appointed by the stakeholders, oddly enough, and they will be in charge of all land use planning decisions in the state of California. And they will be free to say that your property, your ranch, your farm, your business is inefficient and it's therefore a blight. If a property is considered a blight, you won't be eligible to get loans because blighted property can't be loaned on. Now what really constitutes a blight? You're too far from public transportation or anything else the appointed official says it is. So SB1, how about the child transgender law? Is there anybody in here that would like their children showering with a child of the opposite sex because Joey thinks he should have been born Jeanette that day? I can't think of one person that thinks that piece of trash is a good law. Second Amendment rights. You have the right to keep and bear arms. You have the unalienable right. Now remember, I disagree with one thing. We don't have constitutional rights. There's no such thing. There are no such thing as constitutional rights. We have unalienable rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution. In other words, the Constitution is not the rule book. The Constitution is the line the government is never to cross.
Right on. Come on.
Well, if that's the line the government is never to cross, why are they crossing it? Because, no, look, if you want to know who's at fault for this, go look in the mirror.
Come on.
We allowed them to cross that line. I have allowed them to cross that line. And I got to say, you've all been busy. You're farming, you're raising kids, you're vaccinating cattle, you're doing all the things people have to do to make it. I have 3 or 4 jobs. My wife has 2 jobs just to make it here. So, I can understand why we've been pretty busy, but it's no excuse. Because you know what the price of liberty is? Eternal vigilance. Eternal vigilance. And we closed our eyes. Now, the Los Angeles Times said that the state of Jefferson will never happen, and if it happens, it'll never make it because all of the important work in California is being done on the coast. All of the important work is being done on the coast. I would like to write a rebuttal to that, and it'd be 1 sentence long. Look at your dinner plate every day. Because you didn't grow it, and it did take water to put that tomato on your plate and put that steak on your plate. So now, what is the state of Jefferson going to be and how is this going to work? Let's say in a perfect world we get passage by both the state legislature and the federal legislature. So what we do is we get this legislation introduced, we get a simple majority. Article 4, Section 3 does not mention the governor. He's not mentioned specifically. He doesn't need to sign this. Article 4, Section 3 does not mention the President of the United States either. But at that point, the fight's going to start, guys, and this is where we need your help. Because we need to help the people in Southern California understand why this is a win-win. And it is a win for them. They have problems in Southern California that we can't understand. Large infrastructure, urban problems, gang problems, water problems, freeway problems, earthquake problems. They have things going on down there that we can't understand and we can't help them with. Look, they're not bad people. They just don't know you. They don't know how you live. They don't know what it takes to make a living here. They don't know how hard you work, and they don't know how hard you struggle. And they don't understand why these regulatory processes make your life so difficult. And as Terry said, California passes 800 laws a year, 800 of them. 99% of those do nothing more than make your life more difficult and more expensive. I mean, let's look at CARB just for a second. I got a 1978 International 1466. It's an old tractor, but it works good, lasts a long time. I paid $4,000 for it. I am a criminal right now because I absolutely refuse to submit, and I will never put a $20,000 exhaust filter on that tractor. I'm also a criminal because of the ban on lead hunting ammunition. I raise animals. My wife and I raise animals, so we don't need to hunt for neat. But I mean, you know, we like to do things like everybody else does. But what I'm talking about mainly is ground squirrels. I probably shoot 500 ground squirrels a year in my barnyard, and I absolutely will not go out and find aluminum ammunition to shoot ground squirrels with. So that's another. I'm now a criminal because I won't use non-lead ammunition to shoot ground squirrels. That makes me a criminal and subject to prosecution of some kind or another. These are the types of things I'm talking about. I actually went to Sacramento when they were going to do this lead ban thing, because I have a bunch of lead on our mountain. I thought it was gold. I thought I'd hit it, you know. And it was in with a bunch of quartz, so I took about 20 pounds down to the barnyard, and I was pounding that out, and then I was going to pan it, you know. And it wasn't acting like iron in the quartz, you know. It just didn't look right. So I went and I stuck a magnet to it, and the magnet didn't stick. So my neighbor, buddy, he takes a torch and he hits a lump of it and it melts into lead. And I thought, for gosh sakes, how about that? So I took some of that ore, I went down to a water bond meeting and I took some ore and I was going to go talk to some of these legislators about this lead ban. Well, I went into the office of the guy that wrote that bill and I talked to one of his staffers. And I showed him this ore and I said, this is lead. It's found right on my ranch. It's natural and you want to hold it? And he said, well, I don't want to hold that, he said. And I said, look, you know, I wouldn't grind it up and put it in my mashed potatoes, but it's not toxic if you just stand there and hold it. So he says, that's lead, huh? And I said, yeah, that's lead. And he says, I'll be darned. He says, I thought somebody made that in a factory somewhere. And I said, no, it's on the periodic table of elements. They teach you about that in high school. But you know... But quite frankly, you know, it doesn't make him bad or good. It's just how he really thinks. And it illustrates the fact that he doesn't know you, and he doesn't know me, and he doesn't know what it takes for us to live, and he can't possibly understand why I need to shoot squirrels that are undermining my barn or digging holes under my shop, you know. So, once again, now, if we get the state of Jefferson passed, at that point the hard work begins, because committees of reconciliation will be appointed either by Congress or the legislature or by our own state constitutional convention. And that's when the million mundane things that happen that make a state are going to happen. The allocation of assets, for example. And the state's attorney general's opinion of that is anything that is an asset of California that lies within the geography of the new state becomes the asset of the new state. So, for example, we have 2 or 3 prisons within the state of Jefferson, but the state of Jefferson only has 3% on average of all the state's prisoners. So that would mean that 97% of those prisoners, we get a check from California to house those prisoners. Yeah! We have vast amounts of water that pass through the state of Jefferson. Now, water rights are water rights, and I don't agree with monkeying with those because I don't want anybody monkeying with mine. However, counties that watch a vast amount of water that pass through their county and they derive no benefit from that water, why couldn't that county put a transfer fee on that water of, you know, I mean, if Westlands Water is buying it for $50 an acre foot and selling it for $600 or $700 an acre foot, why shouldn't these counties get $100 an acre foot to watch it go by? I mean, there are a lot of ways that the state of Jefferson can and will fund itself. For example, we don't need a state roads department. Every county has a road department. Well, the road department is Caltrans is fully funded by the federal government. Those monies would then be allocated to counties to do road work. And Caltrans doesn't do the big jobs anyway, they contract them out. Right. We don't think we need state police. Every county sheriff has a sheriff's department fully capable of patrolling the county. And what we would do is reallocate those monies to counties. The county of Sutter and the county of Yuba have MOUs with the federal government. There is no federal law enforcement allowed in these counties unless the sheriff signs an MOU. Well, we don't need federal law enforcement. Every county has a sheriff department. What I would say is that the federal government should contract with Yuba and Sutter County for any federal stuff, chasing poachers or whatever, and then they should pay the sheriff prevailing federal wage, prevailing federal benefit, plus profit and overhead for administration. And that way your sheriff's department would be better manned, better equipped, better staffed, and there would be only one code of conduct, and that code of conduct would be responsible to you, the voter that put that sheriff in his chair. The federal government. Everybody says, well, oh, okay, you're your own state. But what about the feds? Well, let's talk about the feds. The 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution says that powers not specifically allowed to the federal government are reserved for the states or for the people. So as a state government with some backbone, we could then support your county in its resource decisions and its governmental decisions and hold the feds at arm's length and say, you must obey all laws and rules prior to doing business in Yuba and Sutter County. Otherwise, we won't allow you to do business here at all. And believe me, we've done that before with NOAA Fisheries and U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and quite frankly, we've been to fish meetings, and we ask them, well, what about the Data Quality Assessment Act? And they kind of look and go, what's that? And we say, well, who's your data quality assessment officer? We don't know what that is. Have you coordinated with county government? Well, we cooperate. And I said, no, there are federal laws that demand that you coordinate with all local governmental entities prior to the planning process of any federal project you want to do. And they kind of look at each other and they say, oh boy, we didn't know about that. Well, we did that with Fish and Wildlife and they went away for 2 years. So the 10th Amendment will work, but you must have a state framework with the backbone to support your county. We envision a state where the county has the lion's share of the power. Government in the United States should work from the bottom up, where your representation has to look you in the eye every single day. So we envision where the county will have the lion's share of the power and the state government will do what states should do. Keep its nose out of county business. They should adjudicate any disputes between counties, administer federal projects, whatever those are, divvy the money up to the counties, talk to other states and talk to foreign governments. That's what states should do. We would say that the state's engineer's office, if you have a big infrastructure project that you need to do in Yuba or Sutter, you call the state engineer office if you need a little bit of help, and there's going to be 5 people in there instead of 5,000. And they'll help you with expertise in engineering, but not put their nose in your business. A school district should be determined by Yuba and Sutter County. You should determine. You should determine what your children learn, not the federal government, and certainly not the state. So those are some of the things, some of the ways we envision the state working. For example, a part-time legislator. We do not need full-time legislature in a small rural state. We're in the process of putting together a state constitution, and I'm about halfway through reading all 50 states' constitutions because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. What we can do is go to small rural states, pick through their constitutions, get the best of every bit of it, and then we'll have a state constitutional convention with representatives from Yuba, from Sutter, from Sierra, from Plumas, from Modoc, from Siskiyou, and you'll decide what our final product's going to look like, but quite frankly, we'll have a framework so that we at least have a point to begin with. We will have a governor. He's going to make a lot less than Jerry makes. Our lieutenant governor might be the Senate president, so we don't have to hire 2 guys. These legislators will work 6 weeks every year on legislative matters, and in off years, they'll work on the budget. So 6 weeks every year. Every other year, it's going to be legislative matters. Each guy's going to get 1 piece of legislation every session. Make it a good one, because you only get 1. So really, what we want to do is start over. We want to get back to the basics of government. We don't need 570 state agencies for a small rural state. Heck, we might get away with, 350 or 360, or maybe even only 100 of them. But we certainly don't need that many. We don't need laws that make your life difficult. We need laws that protect the rights to property, the right of the individual to make a living for himself and his family, and your right to have a moral, historical connection with one another and provide a place where your children can make a living too. I'd like to read something to you just as I close, and then I'll hand it back off to Terry. This is the preamble to the Constitution of the state of Jefferson. There are times in the history of men when political discourse leads to a separation of two people. We, the people of the state of Jefferson, do not make this separation out of enmity, for in the case of enmity, we hold none toward any man, woman, race, or creed. We make this separation in the name of representation, the last barrier standing between the people and tyranny. Tyranny, however well-intentioned, is nonetheless repugnant. Our safety, our security concern us not where our liberty is at risk. Liberty gives urgent voice to our demand for representation. Representation which must reflect our needs, our history, our culture, and our moral imperative. It is these liberties the people of Jefferson hold most dear. It is our natural, unalienable rights which compel us to establish the state of Jefferson. We, the people, direct our representatives now and forever that the intent and meaning of this Constitution shall always be adjudicated to the protection of the lives, liberty, and property of and for the people of the state of Jefferson. With this state constitution, it is our humble prayer to Almighty God to purchase liberty for our posterity. Thomas Paine also said, "It is the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot that will shrink from the service of his country. But he who stands with us now deserves the thanks of men and of women." I remember my mother in 8th grade, she made me take a typing class, and I thought, oh God, gee, here it comes. I'm going to be laughed out of school. But I'll tell you, as I was sitting there grinding away, and by the way, I got up to 24 words a minute with 5 mistakes. I remember one phrase that I typed constantly. Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their country. The time has come for 51. Here.